I broke out just after 7:30, with hundreds of commuters still packing the labyrinth of passages and stairways serving 5 separate underground lines. Witnesses saw flames burst from an old wooden escalator on the Piccadilly line. The fire then spread rapidly through the upper levels, destroying the main ticket hall and filling all passageways with choking smoke.
This morning, forensic experts and fire investigators are examining the debris in the main ticket hall. Most of the victims' bodies were found here. Asbestos in the atmosphere added to the hazards as they made their way towards the escalator, which appeared to have been at the heart of the fire. The intense heat had cracked solid concrete and stripped tiles from the walls. Dense black smoke had spread into every tunnel and stairway, obscuring the exits and burning the oxygen. The first firemen on the scene rushed in without breathing apparatus, described by senior officers as a gut reaction to reach casualties as quickly as possible. Even those with full protection were overcome by the extreme conditions. One 45-year-old officer died. Passengers described the scenes underground as the fire spread.
And when I was about halfway up that escalator, the fire spread suddenly and dramatically, and a sheet of flame came across from across the top of the escalator, filling the whole of the space at the top of the escalator right up to the ceiling.
Where the smoke was coming out from originally, it just broke, and like an elastic band, it kind of shot back.
Survivors were taken to 2 London hospitals. Anne Lucas, ITN, King's Cross Station.
Despite all the efforts of ambulance and fire crews, the death toll increased way beyond their expectations. University College Hospital admitted the most serious casualties. In the confusion, people searched for missing relatives. For some, the night was to end in grief at St Pancras Coroner's offices, a few streets away from the disaster. Among the dead was 45-year-old fireman Colin Townsley, who lost his life trying to rescue others. It's thought he may not have been wearing breathing equipment.
We are in shock. We don't take losing colleagues lightly, and we're very distressed by it, of course. He was a very good fire officer. He was an experienced fire officer. He'd served in the West End of London for a long time.
2 other firemen were among 4 people detained overnight at St Bartholomew's Hospital. They're not seriously ill, but at the University College Hospital this morning, surgeons are still trying to save lives.
Some have got very extensive and major burns, together with lung injuries from inhalation of smoke.
Out of the 7 people still detained here, 3 are in intensive care. Plastic surgeons plan to operate on 2 patients later on this morning. 1 has 40% burns. Andrew Simmons, ITN at the University College Hospital.
A short time ago, the Queen said she was deeply shocked by the tragedy. The Prime Minister is expected to visit some of the injured within the hour, and she's already said that she's absolutely horrified by the fire. Here's the number to phone for inquiries about relatives. It's 01 if you're outside London, 834 7777. I'll repeat that, 834 7777. And that's it. There'll be more details in ITN's next news at 12:30 with Julia Somerville. From me, good morning. Although at first many commuters don't seem to have been aware of anything but some smoke and a smell said to have been like burning paper. But once the fire caught, the heat and thick acrid smoke spread through the passages and tunnels. The fire brigade had a long and horrific task. The fire was awkward to fight, and smaller outbreaks occurred in the passages. Hampered by breathing difficulties and working virtually blind, they spent hours searching the maze of corridors, platforms and tunnels, bringing out victims.
Our firefighters on arrival faced a very daunting task, because fires underground are always a tremendous problem. The main reason why they're a tremendous problem is that you've got flames, hot air and gases coming upwards. And of course we have to go through that heat barrier to get to the level where the fire is. And I'm extremely proud of my firefighters. The conditions that they've worked under down there are unbearable. Once again, when the pictures are shown later on, if you can imagine what firefighters are actually going into in those situations, does once again indicate the true courage and professionalism of London firefighters.
One fireman lost his life in the rescue efforts. A huge emergency operation was in effect for much of the night, with roads closed and medical staff and ambulances on standby. Some of the last people to be rescued were found sheltering in lavatories, protected from the fierce heat by the doors. This morning, the investigation into the cause of the fire is already underway at this, usually London's busiest station. The team will be looking specifically at the room beneath the escalator, which houses its machinery. Later today, there's expected to be a statement in the House of Commons from the Transport Minister on an official inquiry into the fire.
The British Transport Police say that 18 of the people killed still haven't been identified. Most of the victims of the fire were taken to University College and St Bartholomew's hospitals, both of which are nearby. Dozens of off-duty medical staff came in to help overnight.
Some of the injured are still fighting for their lives in hospital, suffering from extensive burns and lung problems caused by inhaling the dense smoke. Teams of specialists worked throughout the night. Many of the patients needed emergency plastic surgery.
There's always an air of fairly well-controlled chaos amongst these sort of situations, but I'm really very relieved and very delighted. We have very good facilities here for dealing with a major incident, in that we have special accident and emergency wards alongside the accident department, the actual casualty department, and they were emptied of all their pre-existing patients into the main hospital within minutes.
With hospitals in the area inundated with casualties, the bodies of some they could not help were taken to a local church hall overnight. Post-mortem examinations on the dead will be carried out later today.
Now a brief look at the rest of the news, and the Japanese are to build a factory in Wales which will create 200 jobs. It'll be at Tredegar in Gwent, and electronic printers for computers will be manufactured there. Peter Walker, the Secretary of State for Wales, who's on a visit to Japan, announced the project at a news conference in Tokyo. Scientists at the Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna are still considering an Iranian request to visit a damaged nuclear plant at the Iranian port of Bushehr, bombed by Iraqi jets. But unconfirmed reports say there's been no leakage of radioactive material. Further south, off the coast of Bahrain, Royal Navy minesweepers have destroyed a mine. 4 minesweepers have been searching the area for the last 2 weeks. 300 women have marched through the streets of Malaga in Spain, calling for the release of 5-year-old Melody Nakashan, who was abducted from her home 10 days ago. The women said they wanted to soften the hearts of her kidnappers, who've threatened to starve Melody. The kidnappers have again dropped the ransom demand to $4 million. Our next news, midday.
Good morning to you. There's an awful lot of rain around at the moment over Wales.
To see for herself what it's like below ground. The commuters who use this busy interchange between the British rail system and the underground system have been trying to make the best of it. The underground system is, of course, closed at this point, so they've had to take taxis or cross the road to get buses, and the pavements here have been much busier, as thousands and thousands of people who normally use the underground system have had to find other means of transport. Now back to Maurice Stewart in the studio.
Well, 18 of the people killed in the fire still haven't been identified. Most of those injured were taken to 2 hospitals nearby, University College and St Bartholomew's. The Prime Minister went to University College Hospital to meet staff who had worked through the night. She then went to talk to patients recovering in the wards and insisted that this part of her visit should be private.
Some of the injured are still fighting for their lives in hospital, suffering from extensive burns and lung problems caused by inhaling the dense smoke. Teams of specialists worked throughout the night. Many of the patients needed emergency plastic surgery.
There's always an air of fairly well-controlled chaos amongst these sort of situations, but I'm really very relieved and very delighted. We have very good facilities here for dealing with a major incident, in that we have special accident and emergency wards alongside the accident department, the actual casualty department, and they were emptied of all their pre-existing patients into the main hospital within minutes.
With hospitals in the area inundated with casualties, the bodies of some they could not help were taken to a local church hall overnight. Post-mortem examinations on the dead will be carried out later today.
Other news, and at the Cleveland Child Sexual Abuse Inquiry, the paediatrician, Dr. Marietta Higgs, is being cross-examined by counsel for some of the families involved. Yesterday, Simon Hawksworth QC said the children had been subjected to horrendous medical examinations that had seriously disturbed them. Some of the families are now planning to sue Dr. Higgs and her colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Wyatt.
The parents obviously wish to be compensated for the pain and suffering which they endured, and also the
chaos and panic in the minutes after the first flames broke out. But all have paid tribute to the heroism of the 150 firemen who attempted to get everyone they could out, even after one of their own colleagues had perished. And when Mrs. Thatcher arrived here just under an hour ago, it was to those firemen that she talked first, before going below ground to see the devastation for herself.
The local MP, Frank Dobson, went down to King's Cross Station to view the wreckage this morning. He said any inquiry must cover other recent tube fires and was asked whether he thought any measures could be taken now to reduce the risk of another tragedy.
Well, I don't know what's caused it here, but what has certainly caused fires in other places is where rubbish has been allowed to build up and has then caught fire for one reason or another. And the efforts of London Transport to save money by reducing staff and not cleaning the stations as much as they used to might be a contributing factor. I don't know, but it might be.
The Railwaymen's Union, the NUR, has been giving warnings for some time about the vital importance of adequate staffing on the Underground. General Secretary Jimmy Knapp said safety should be the overriding consideration. He added that those responsible for cutting back staff and the overall maintenance of stations must now review their policy. London Underground say services are getting back to normal, but all lines are subject to delay. The police have issued an emergency number for anyone who may be concerned for friends or relatives. It's 01 834 7777. That's 834 7777. And that's all for now. I'll be back with an update on BBC Two at 4 o'clock. But now for the weather, here's Michael Fish.
Good afternoon. It was certainly raining cats and dogs here in London at the moment. It's as black as ink outside. And indeed, I think we're going to have a really wet afternoon in most parts of the region, although the heavy rain hasn't quite reached parts of Kent, Surrey and Sussex yet. But it's moving south all the while, so a wet spell. The rain finally clearing away sometime during the course of the evening. That'll leave us with a fine, dry night, well-broken cloud, and certainly a much colder night than recently. Although there'll be a fair bit of wind around, there might, in one or two sheltered spots, be a touch of ground frost. That's all for now.
In half an hour, Charlene helps Nikki prepare for her big night, and Des and Daphne finally enjoy a romantic dinner for two. That's on BBC One.
The 1 o'clock news from the BBC with Michael Burke.
Good afternoon. It's still not clear how many people died in last night's fire at King's Cross Station in London. At least 30, with 21 more, many seriously injured, in hospital. Thousands of commuters were in the station when the fire ripped through and devastated it. The victims underground who didn't stand a chance. The heroes who tried to get them out. The cause, still a mystery as the inquiry gets underway. Mrs. Thatcher sees the tragedy on the tube and says the scale of it is beyond comprehension. King's Cross Station has been eerily quiet for much of this morning after the worst fire disaster in the history of the London Underground. At least 30 people were suffocated and burnt to death, including a fireman. 12 are seriously injured in hospital, 3 of them reportedly fighting for their lives. Last night's rush hour was just starting to tail off when the fire broke out near a crowded escalator leading up from the Piccadilly line to the ticket hall. There was panic among the thousands of commuters in the station and great courage from police and firemen as flames and deadly smoke filled the passageways. The heat was so great it cracked concrete, melted metal and ceiling tiles. Such was the confusion, the dead were still being counted and relatives informed this morning. The police have given a number for information about casualties. It's 01 if you're outside London, 834 7777. Be patient, that number's very busy. We'll repeat the number later in the programme. Messages of sympathy and condolence have been pouring in. The Queen said she was deeply shocked and sent her heartfelt sympathy to the victims' relatives. Mrs. Thatcher visited survivors in hospital and said she was horrified at the disaster. The Archbishop of Canterbury called for prayers for the dead and gratitude for the courageous rescuers. The cause of the fire has not been established. A full inquiry is already underway amid accusations that warnings had been ignored and from the local MP that the interests of safety had been sacrificed to the interests of profit. Our first report from Michael Sullivan.
On the surface, the fire would have been a minor affair, but below ground, in the labyrinth of tunnels and shafts where 5 of London's underground railway routes coincide, a disaster was being kindled. The many stairways leading down from the pavements to the station's booking hall were already smoking chimneys. Firemen were met by a blast of hot air, smoke and gases. It was 7:45 in the evening, the tail end of the nightly rush hour. Nobody knew how many people were down there or what chance there was of their survival. The first firemen to get there plunged straight into the smoke, but they could neither see nor breathe, and they were quickly followed by others wearing breathing apparatus. As they fought to reach the seat of the fire and the people overcome by the heat and smoke, those who had escaped described the beginning, when the fire seemed to be nothing more than a mild inconvenience to people hurrying up and down the escalators.
Everyone was just sort of standing around and getting out of the way of the smoke.
Was there any panic?
Not really, no.
But underground stations are drafty places. Moving trains push the air along the tunnels in front of them. Warm air rises through shafts and up the escalators towards the surface. The fire had started underneath an escalator, and in minutes, King's Cross Underground Station became a furnace. People who had not moved fast enough were felled as the hot air hit their lungs, and firemen began to emerge with their bodies. Several hours after the first alarm, there was no clear idea of how many people had died. Many had been taken to hospital, many more were dead when they were brought to the surface.
There was smoke billowing out of the exits, firemen running all over the place, trying to get in to help trapped people. And one of the first sights I came across was a man lying on the ground surrounded by firemen. They had electric shock equipment connected up to him, trying to revive him. 3 times they tried desperately to save him, but he was dead, there's no doubt about it.
My BA crews are actually searching for breathing apparatus crews, are searching all the tunnels now, just to try and find these people.
In the small hours of the morning, the last of the hot air escaped, replaced by cool air from the empty railway tunnels, and firemen and policemen moved into the burned-out station's booking hall. Here, the oven-like temperatures had incinerated the ticket kiosks and melted paint and plastic from the ticket machines. Here, the firemen had found bodies lying where they fell. Those below the fire, on the station platforms, had survived in the cool air rushing past them to feed the flames above.
Mrs. Thatcher has been visiting some of the injured who are being treated at the University College Hospital. She was joined by the Transport Secretary, Paul Shannon, who will announce an official inquiry when he makes a statement to the Commons this afternoon.
The Prime Minister arrived at University College Hospital with her Transport Secretary, Mr. Channon. She told hospital staff she'd wanted to see the work being done to help treat the survivors, and praised what she described as the tremendous efforts of the hospital staff who worked through the night in the accident and emergency units. Questioned about the tragedy, the Prime Minister had little to say at this stage, apart from expressing her shock and horror at last night's events.
Gentlemen, I've asked you not to come round because I think it's very disturbing. Very disturbing.
She was taken first to the intensive care unit, where 3 patients are being treated. None was well enough to speak to the Prime Minister. She was said to be shocked by their condition and compared the disaster to the Bradford fire. She saw 2 other patients in another ward, and although unable to speak to them either, she did express her sympathy to relatives. Before leaving for King's Cross, the Prime Minister spoke to many more members of staff at the hospital, again expressing her admiration for their work.
And after leaving the hospital, Mrs. Thatcher went on to King's Cross Station to get a first-hand report of what had happened.
Apart from the acrid smell of smoke that still hangs in the air, there are now few clues to the extent of last night's tragedy. Police guard the charred entrances to the underground station as firemen, still wearing breathing apparatus, prepare to go below ground yet again. They're now trying to find the cause of the blaze. Because King's Cross Underground Station is closed, the thousands of commuters who normally use this busy interchange between the rail and the tube systems have had to make the best of it, using bus or taxis instead, or just walking. Just over an hour ago, the Prime Minister arrived at King's Cross. She spoke to some of the firemen and police who were on duty at the height of last night's blaze. Going below ground to see for herself the extent of the damage, she was taken to the escalator where last night's blaze broke out. She talked to some of the workmen who are clearing up the debris. She spent almost half an hour in the burnt-out underground station. When she emerged, she was asked if there were any clues to the cause of the fire.
There is no point in speculating about what happened. All we can say at the moment is the fire services, the London Transport Police, the police were magnificent. They were faced with a fire of enormous heat intensity. The police had no apparatus and were helping people, and all of them complimenting one another, as you would expect.
Mrs. Thatcher said every effort would be made to find out the cause of the fire and why so many people had died.
The fireman who died was named this morning as 45-year-old station officer Colin Townsley, who was married with 2 daughters. He'd been in the fire service for 23 years and was described by a senior officer as a superb firefighter. There was praise for all those who took part in the rescue operation, working in what were described as horrendous conditions. And it's now clear, working without maps of the underground system as they were kept in a booking hall at the heart of the fire. David Loyne reports.
150 firefighters were involved. Streets for a mile around King's Cross were sealed off by police for 30 fire engines and their support and control vehicles. Experienced fire officers said the conditions were the worst they'd ever encountered.
Horrendous, one of the worst fires I've been to for many years. Any fire underground is horrendous to a firefighter. There is no ventilation, we need to take our own lighting down there. We're working in very hot, difficult conditions. We have to do everything with breathing apparatus on. So this was a particularly dangerous and difficult fire to fight.
The problem for firefighters at the start was going through the heat and smoke rising from the fire below. Some went down without breathing apparatus, against their training according to a senior officer, but a brave and human reaction. Health Minister Edwina Currie paid tribute to 2 that she met when they came out.
The conditions inside were so hot. The ceiling, the floor, the walls, everything was on fire. And that the only way they survived was to drop down onto the floor into the pool of water, where they had some protection, and they both collapsed and had to be brought out.
The police will be investigating complaints that some members of the public were allowed into King's Cross after the fire began, and others directed up escalators into the fire itself. Today they say they're satisfied with their training procedures to cope with disasters.
There was obviously had to be a great amount of chaos initially because of the circumstances, but with the fire brigade in attendance and the Metropolitan Police, yes, it worked as smoothly as this could be expected to do.
Ambulances ferried the injured to 2 hospitals. Some workers stopped an overtime ban and came to work, and hospital workers also responded quickly to the disaster.
Huge numbers came in, lots and lots of staff, and I don't just mean nurses and doctors, electricians, catering staff, cleaning staff, all sorts of technical people and so on, who actually heard it on the news and came straight in.
This morning, rescue workers continued to clean up. 2 firefighters were injured, and 1 was among the dead.
The Labour leader Neil Kinnock has said the recommendations of a public inquiry must be acted upon by government and transport authorities. And the Labour MP, whose constituency covers King's Cross, Frank Dobson, says there's been concern about staffing on the underground for some time. Mr Dobson visited the station this morning.
The fact of the matter is that it looks as though the interests of safety are being sacrificed from the point of view of trying to save money. And it's also worth saying that both the firefighters who've put in such a courageous effort here, and the ambulance service and the hospital service who've done such stalwart work during the night, all of them are doing it with less staff and less money.
Concern about staffing on the Underground has also been voiced by the trade unions. Alan Norman is the National Union of Railwomen's Divisional Officer for London Regional Transport, and he's in our central London studio now. Mr. Norman, we don't know the cause, but in the union's view, who's to blame?
Well, it's too early to say who's to blame. The inquiry, hopefully, which will be very quick, we'll work that one out. We'll certainly be at that inquiry and every other inquiry.
But you have complained, I know, about cuts in staffing done by London Regional Transport. Do you think that they have affected the safety in London's Underground stations?
They certainly haven't improved it anyway. I mean, there's been cuts on the station staffing. For instance, at King's Cross, only a couple of years ago, there was 16 railmen there. There's only a complement of 10 railmen at King's Cross now. The Cleaning Services Division, which had, until fairly recently, 14 people keeping the place clean. Precisely that time last night, there used to be 14. There's only 2 full-time staff and 1 part-timer on duty last night. I'm not saying that's the cause of the accident, we don't know that yet, but it certainly doesn't help when you've got more passengers than ever travelling on London Underground Limited, an all-time record, but you've got less and less people dealing with those passengers.
Are your members properly trained to cope with problems of this kind? There's been a lot of praise for the firemen and the police, but rather less praise, I think, for some of the London transport officials there.
Well, as I understand it, the staff done everything that they possibly could last night. But as regarding training, the representatives tell me that they're far from happy regarding the training. One representative was telling me this morning that for dealing with fires, there's only a very small amount of training when they go through the training school at White City. Only a matter of sort of an hour's training, and that's dealing with fairly small fires with using extinguishers. Nothing like the training that would be required for dealing with a terrible disaster that occurred last night.
That's the situation at the moment. Have you any worries for the future plans of London Regional Transport?
Well, when you know that they intend to cut another 1,200 staff away from stations, that causes all sorts of worries. I know that with modern technology, they introduce ticket machines. New ticket machines are coming in and replacing staff. But as we all know, ticket machines don't help passengers. And I think with the volume of traffic going through underground stations nowadays, we certainly need the same staff, and we certainly don't need even less staff.
Mr. Norman, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks very much.
London Regional Transport is interviewing staff on duty at King's Cross at the time of the fire. Dr. Tony Ridley, the spokesman for LRT, says staffing levels haven't affected safety.
Believe that staffing levels have had anything to do with the fire last night. We will, of course, look at procedures. We will, of course, look at staffing numbers. We will ask all the questions that both we think is necessary and you think and the public think are necessary.
Wouldn't more staff mean more people to deal with members of the public in an emergency like that?
That might be the case, but until we know how the staff acted precisely, we will be totally unable to say whether additional numbers would have been of any assistance. I personally doubt it, but I would not wish to prejudge that question.
Are you satisfied that all the staff are familiar with evacuation and emergency procedures?
They all receive training, but once again, this is something else that our inquiry must examine.
When was the last training exercise?
The last training exercise the training exercises are going on regularly. I do not currently have the information as to when the last training exercise was at King's Cross.
The Passenger Pressure Group 2 years ago recommended a number of improvements in underground station safety. Have you adopted any of those proposals?
We have adopted a number of recommendations. We have not necessarily adopted all of the recommendations that were made by that group, but we have carried out our own full inquiry of the Oxford Circus fire and set in motion a number of steps as a result of that.
The experts are saying it's still too early to be certain what caused the fire, but reports from eyewitnesses suggest it started around the wooden escalator leading from the Piccadilly line platform. This is certainly one of the areas the investigation into the disaster will be looking at closely, as our transport correspondent Christopher Wayne reports.
The London Underground system's old wooden slatted escalators are being replaced with these modern metal versions as the money becomes available. But it's not just the wood that's old-fashioned, so too is the insulation of the cables running alongside. Although it's possible that a cigarette end dropped into rubbish which had collected under the escalator, that seems unlikely, because examination has shown the area was clean. So a more likely possibility may be that an electrical fault or friction set light to the insulation of the cables running the length of the escalator. That would account for the density of the smoke reported, and for the speed with which the fire spread. This has been the latest in a series of fires on the underground system. In 1981, a man died during a fire at Goodge Street Station. Several hundred people had to be evacuated through smoke-filled tunnels. And in 1984, there was a near disaster at Oxford Circus. Passengers were trapped for more than 2 hours after fire broke out in a workman's hut. Whatever else the authorities may say about the King's Cross tragedy, they can't say they weren't warned. After the Oxford Circus fire, a pressure group reported, London Regional Transport have been extremely fortunate that no lives have been lost. Luck has a habit of running out. The report called for the installation of sprinkler systems and smoke detectors. It said fire doors should be installed, together with clearly marked emergency exits. It was disregarded. Its author was Jonathan Roberts.
It's regrettable, but a lot of safety improvements that happen on the underground and on British transport generally come about because we learn from tragedies like this. The most important priority are twofold. Firstly, better internal communication and staff training, so that if something breaks out, then passengers can be shepherded safely away rapidly. Secondly, smoke detectors, so that the earliest possible warning of such fires is given.
We don't have smoke detectors because there are staff around who can readily observe if we have a problem. It would appear from what we know already that our staff did observe the problem, but what was totally unexpected was the fire that followed, and we need to investigate that. It will be painstaking work to do it and to find out what happened and why.
There's no doubt the inquiry into the disaster will reveal errors of judgment. Passengers were directed into the burning booking hall instead of to another safe exit. And people who died would probably have survived if they'd stayed on the platforms instead of obeying their instincts and trying to reach the open air. But some critics will also be pointing to what they see as LRT's failure to recognise the true risks of fire, and the policy of trying to make an urban transport system self-supporting. Cutting subsidies, they argue, leads to attempts to cut costs, and that may include staff and maintenance.
The man in charge of the fire brigade operation for the last 18 hours is Assistant Chief Fire Officer Joe Kennedy, and he's at King's Cross now. Mr. Kennedy, I see you've at last had an opportunity to change and wash. Your men were very brave. What was it like down there for them?
Well, the fire conditions were terrible. They are the worst that I've seen in my 26 and a half years. You've got to take into account that a fire underground is always worse than normal fires. And what they had down there was a most serious fire situation, which spread quite rapidly. And in fact, where the concrete structure of the footways and the tunnels absorbed the heat and held it there. Generally, when we fight fires in underground situations, we normally overcome the initial heat barrier and get into a cooler atmosphere. This wasn't the case last night. And if you've seen the pictures of firemen totally exhausted after 15-20 minutes hard work fighting that fire last night, I think you can appreciate what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Kennedy, everybody knows what a hazard these underground tube stations must be, but is enough being done about it? You yourself were involved in the Oxford Circus tube fire 3 years or so ago. Have the lessons of that not been learned and put into practice?
Well, let me just say, I've been to a number of fires on the underground, about 3 or 4. You talk about the number that are occurring. I think really and truly the track record so far of LUL is quite good. when you say did we learn from the lessons of Oxford Circus, we certainly did. Some of the things that we put into operation last night, for instance, the availability of a plan which enabled us to have 5 access points to carry out our firefighting operations, was as a result of the lessons we learned at Oxford Circus. The no smoking ban, which was a recommendation of the London Fire Brigade, was immediately put into being. The fact that we have asked London Underground Limited that in carrying out major refurbishment work of fire stations, that flammable materials are taken out at the end of each working day. That is another factor which has assisted in preventing fires occurring.
Mr. Kennedy, thanks very much for joining us, and our congratulations to your men.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
A short time ago, some of the firemen who were injured in the rescue operation have been speaking about the events of last night. They're being treated at the University College Hospital.
Extremely hot fire. I've had a number of basement fires before, but nothing on this scale. And I must say that all the crew with me and all the people who brought me out were extremely professional, very good blokes. And it was an extremely difficult job. I've never known anything like it. Not an underground concourse, not that time of night. And we've had derelict fires that have been that large, but nothing on this scale. I mean, we had the floors, the ceilings were alight, the walls are coming down, the ceiling tiles are coming down, the kiosks were well alight. It was just incredible.
There was a lot of debris, ceiling tiles were exploding, off, dropping onto us.
Falling and rolling down the escalator. And by this time, of course, we'd turned and we were hurrying back down the way we'd come. And the escalator was still moving at that stage.
In the small hours of the morning, the last of the hot air escaped, replaced by the cool air from the empty railway tunnels. And firemen and policemen moved into the burned-out station's booking hall, where oven-like temperatures had incinerated the ticket kiosks and melted paint and plastic from the ticket machines. Here the firemen had found bodies lying where they fell. Those below the fire, on the station platforms, had survived in the cool air rushing past them to feed the flames above.
The firefighter who died at King's Cross was Colin Townsley, who was 45 and married with 2 daughters. He was leading the first team of firemen to answer the emergency call. It's believed he went down into the smoke-filled station without breathing apparatus in a brave attempt to try to pinpoint the source of the fire. His colleagues have today been paying tribute to his courage.
Trapped with 2 other firemen underground, Station Officer Townsley knew that with the smoke and flames rising, the safe thing to do would have been to go to the platform below. But as the man in charge, he decided instead to try and find a way through the inferno to report the situation to those on the surface.
I would say that he was about 15 foot from safety, but due to the large, dense smoke, it was only when he got to that point that we found him and managed to drag him out. He was the officer in charge, and it would be his duty. He goes down to assess what fire he's got, and he done everything right. And of course, he wanted to get out to sort of send messages back and so forth to let everybody know what was going on.
Last night, London's firefighters were tested to the limit of their endurance. This morning, the men and women of the brigade were checking the equipment that saved their lives and reflecting on the loss of one of their colleagues. Each knows that death is an ever-present risk of the fire service, but that makes it no easier to bear. In hospital this afternoon, 2 of the men who were injured but survived relived last night's ordeal.
Extremely hot fire. I've had a number of basement fires before, but nothing on this scale. And I must say that all the crew with me and all the people who brought me out were extremely professional, very good blokes. And it was an extremely difficult job. I've never known anything like it.
The main problem was actually actually getting the hose lines extended and communication back. It was extremely hot. You couldn't see 2 inches in front of you from floor to ceiling. The crews worked marvellously together though, and basically did a fantastic job.
Many of those who fought last night's fire early on, including the man who died, broke the rules by charging into the smoke-filled station without breathing apparatus. Many of those who survived will thank them for that for the rest of their lives.
This morning, the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary went to University College Hospital. There they met some of the casualties. There was praise for the rescuers, the doctors and the nurses, most of whom had worked throughout the night. Then Mrs. Thatcher went on to King's Cross itself.
Mrs. Thatcher's first thought was for the survivors. At University College Hospital, less than half a mile from King's Cross, she met the staff who dealt with many of the victims of the fire. And in private, she also met 7 survivors of the tragedy who are still being treated for their injuries. Moving on to King's Cross, the Prime Minister met some of the firefighters and policemen who were on duty at the height of the blaze. They took her down into the burnt-out booking hall of the tube station so she could see for herself the extent of the damage. And they pointed out the escalator where it's thought the fire started. From the bottom of the escalator, firemen explained how the blaze spread quickly.
Could you put your lights up there? Yes.
The Prime Minister spent almost half an hour below ground. She emerged full of praise for the way the emergency services had dealt with the blaze.
What I think you don't get a feel of, except by being with the firemen, is of the intense heat in a limited space. That is correct. That is the most that this gentleman has been telling me. It really was the intense heat. And of course you're going down into a confined space and you don't know just how far it is. Under those circumstances, the firemen and the policemen and the London Transport Police were magnificent.
Mrs. Thatcher said it was too early to speculate about the cause of the fire, but said everything would be done to find out why it happened and why so many people died.
Every station on the London Underground has to undergo an annual safety inspection by the fire brigade. King's Cross was last checked in April. London Transport says it's satisfied with its fire precautions. It points out that 2 years ago, after a fire at another tube station, smoking was banned on the Underground. But despite a programme of modernisation, a lot of the equipment in the capital's tube stations is elderly. Tonight, the experts are asking whether it was machinery which was installed before the war which was to blame for last night's disaster.
The London Underground system's old wooden slatted escalators were designed 50 years ago. As each one costs about £1 million to replace, the policy is to keep them in service as long as spares last. But it's not just the wood that's old-fashioned, so too is the insulation of the cables running alongside. The early theory that the blaze was caused by a cigarette end dropped into rubbish which had collected under the escalator is now being discounted. Investigation has shown that the area was clean. In any case, the rubbish receptacles, like the motors, are underneath the ends of the escalator, but the fire erupted partway along. A more likely possibility may be that an electrical fault or friction inside the machinery set light to the insulation of the cables running the length of the escalator. That could account for the density of the smoke reported and for the speed with which the fire spread. The problem is the fire brigade say they think the blaze started above the stair level. Escalators are cleaned and maintained by London Regional Transport's own staff, though some of the cleaning has been contracted out. The cuts in staff have been bitterly opposed.
I know that with modern technology, they introduce ticket machines. New ticket machines are coming in and replacing staff. But as we all know, ticket machines don't help passengers.
Although the streamlined tube services are more cost-efficient, some experts are voicing concern.
People need the visible presence of uniformed staff at stations to be able to ask questions under normal circumstances and for those staff to be available to deal with emergencies when they occur. Mercifully, they're rare, but when they occur, we need them.
Some critics are claiming that the King's Cross disaster shows the danger of trying to make an urban transport system self-supporting. Cutting subsidies, they argue, leads to attempts to cut costs, including staff and maintenance. LRT insists that staff reduction hasn't been at the cost of safety. They say yesterday the emergency system worked well.
Every underground railway in the world treats the matter of fire extremely seriously. It would be foolish of me to say that we could not have a fire because we had a great tragedy last night. But I have no doubt that our safety standards are as high as any underground railway in the world.
But the disaster inquiry will certainly reveal mistakes, and people who died might have survived if they'd stayed underground instead of obeying instinct and trying to reach the open air.
Well, it will be for the public inquiry to decide whether the safety regulations are tight enough. There are those who believe they're not, and they've been saying so for several years. In 1985, a report from the London Passenger Transport Review Group said the underground was a potential fire trap, which failed to meet even minimum safety standards. London Transport said at the time that their fire precautions were adequate to cope with even the worst emergency. And today they've been praising the efforts of their own staff at King's Cross, who helped to save many lives.
Jonathan Roberts, transport consultant, warned a full 2 years ago that an underground disaster was just waiting to happen. He investigated every aspect of the 1984 fire at Oxford Circus Station, and in his report he told London Regional Transport their stations failed to meet even minimum safety standards. In an alien world of underground tunnels, he says, the public are especially vulnerable and safety must be obvious.
It's an unfamiliar environment for many people. When there's delay, people need reassurance, and when there's a major incident, then people don't just need assurance, they need assistance and they need advice and ability to get out from the station fairly quickly.
In his report, Jonathan Roberts called for smoke detectors at all stations and fire doors to stop smoke spreading. Alarm bells should be installed, he said, along with illuminated exit signs. To fight fires, water sprinklers were essential, and to minimise the threat to life, materials used in stations should be as safe, as non-flammable as possible. As he travelled among the rush hour crowds today, Mr. Roberts saw little evidence that his warnings had been heeded. No doubt, he says, they'll be looked at again after King's Cross.
It's regrettable, but a lot of safety improvements that happen on the underground and on British transport generally come about because we learn from tragedies like this.
But what should be the priorities then now in trying to avoid anything like this on this scale happening again?
The most important priority are twofold. Firstly, better internal communication and staff training, so that if something breaks out, then passengers can be shepherded safely away rapidly. Secondly, smoke detectors, so that the earliest possible warning of such fires is given.
2 years ago, Jonathan Roberts wrote that London Regional Transport had been very lucky no lives had been lost in fires. He added, prophetically, luck has a habit of running out.
Well, joining us now from King's Cross is Deputy Assistant Chief Officer Colin Livett of the London Fire Brigade. Mr. Livett, you've been working there at King's Cross all day. Have you come across any clues so far as to what could have caused this fire?
What we do have is a clear idea now of the sequence of events from when the fire crews first arrived. All the previous misunderstandings have now been removed, and what we clearly have here was a call to a fire on the escalator, which, when the crews arrived at the head of that escalator, it was not a serious fire as first thought. It was about a third of the way down. The officer in charge commanded his men to return and rig in breathing apparatus and provide the firefighting equipment. Within about 1 to 1.5 minutes, it was then noticed extreme volumes of smoke emitting from all the exits. His crew then returned immediately to try and locate him and carry out the other rescues that were necessary at that point.
So what, Mr. Livett, suddenly turned what was not a serious fire into this horrendous tragedy? Do you know that?
Well, that obviously will now depend on the full inquiry that is carried out. It is no good at all anybody having a theory and trying to find the facts to fit it. We must eliminate all the possibilities till we end up with the cause of this incident and not a cause, in order to safeguard the public at incidents such as this and in the future.
Mr. Livett, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
In the House of Commons, the Labour MP in whose constituency King's Cross is situated said the station had seen the number of its staff reduced in recent years. Frank Dobson said there were now fewer people maintaining the escalators, fewer people clearing rubbish, and that none of them had been taught how to help in an evacuation. The Secretary of State for Transport countered by saying there'd been a considerable increase in investment in the underground. Other matters, he said, were for the inquiry.
Occasions like this in the Commons are usually dominated by tributes and condolences, but this time politics intruded as Frank Dobson reminded the government of proposals to cut 800 jobs in the fire service and to make cutbacks at the very hospitals where the injured were being treated. But his strongest comments came when he asked about economies made at King's Cross by London Regional Transport. He wanted Mr Channon to confirm
that the station staff at a station with 8 platforms and a veritable rabbit warren of tunnels has been cut from 16 to 10, that the cleaning staff have been cut from 14 to 2, that the training provided for the station staff in dealing with fires lasts for 30 minutes and is not specific to their station, and that none of them were taught how to help an evacuation of that station.
The Transport Secretary rebuked him, saying this wasn't the time for snap judgments. He said London Transport had invested a great deal in safety improvements.
It is the prime duty, the statutory duty, of the London Regional Transport to operate the underground safely. And in staffing considerations, safety is a paramount consideration. As to the question of training and procedures, there is an annual review that takes place with the London Fire Brigade. There are continual efforts to improve procedures, but there is an annual review, and that has gone on for some time.
Mr Channon added that he had been assured that the fire and police services were more than satisfied with the resources available to them, and his terse response was backed up by a Tory backbencher who said Mr Dobson's remarks would damage the morale of London Transport staff.
The victims and their families are being offered free legal advice on how to go about claiming compensation. The Law Society has set up an emergency scheme to answer calls from people who need help. The offer is based on lawyers' experience of other disasters, most recently the Zeebrugge ferry tragedy.
Staff at the Law Society were already at work this afternoon, putting the free advice service into effect. Details of the scheme, entered into a computer, will be going out in hundreds of leaflets. The Law Society
discovered a number of people who were trying to exploit victims of the disaster, and we want to make sure that people go to informed and reliable sources of help.
The Law Society believe that by coordinating all the King's Cross claims, they'll secure a better settlement. The number to ring for further information is 01 242 1222, extension 469.
Well, now our reporter Peter Main joins us from King's Cross. Peter, what's happening there tonight?
Well, it's much quieter here now than it was. Normally this place is heaving with homeward bound commuters, but of course many people can't use it now as the interchange as they normally would between the rail system and the tube system. Most of the firemen too have gone home now for a well-earned rest. There are still 10 members of the investigation unit still below ground there. Within the last hour, we were allowed to take our cameras down into the burnt-out booking hall of the tube station.
Normally, these escalators leading up to the booking hall would be packed with homeward-bound commuters. Tonight, there's an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional hammering of workmen clearing debris. Everywhere you look, there's evidence of the intensity of the fire. This was the ticket collector's booth. Roofing material, turned molten in the heat, ran down the walls. Still in their racks, fire extinguishers, which no one had the time to use. Some repair work has already started, but no one really knows just how long it'll be before everything is back to normal.
So that's the situation here at King's Cross this evening, now almost 24 hours after the tragedy. And now back to the 6 o'clock news studio.
Peter Main. There are now 2 emergency numbers for people worried about friends and relations after the fire. They're 01, that's from outside London, 834 7777, or 01 230 7538. That's 834 7777 or 230 7538. Despite what happened last night, experts say travelling by train is still safer than any other form of transport. Until the early 80s, serious fires on the tube had only occurred on average once every 10 years. The worst was in 1945 on the Metropolitan line, when 3 people died. There followed a number of serious fires, most recently 3 years ago at Oxford Street tube station. After that, smoking was banned on the tube, and a year later on stations as well. Motorbike riders face the greatest risk of death, about twice that of cyclists. The next most dangerous form of travel is the motorcar, followed by heavy goods vehicles. Passengers on aeroplanes are the next most at risk, closely followed by bus passengers. But it's the train, and that includes both overground and underground, which has the best safety record of all.
Well, later in the programme, the rest of the day's news. In Northern Ireland, a former loyalist politician, George Seawright, has been shot and seriously injured. Dr. Marietta Higgs has once more been defending her diagnoses. Sexual abuse can happen in caring and loving families, she says. And petals for the princess, a royal welcome behind the bamboo curtain. Now the time is 6:25.
The headlines tonight: there's to be a public inquiry into the fire at King's Cross Underground Station last night, in which 30 people died. The cause of the fire is still a mystery. It began on an escalator. Experts have spent the day examining the debris. The Prime Minister has visited some of the injured in hospital and paid tribute to the courage and dedication of the rescue services and hospital staff. So now the rest of the news. And a controversial former member of the Northern Ireland Assembly has been shot and seriously wounded in Belfast. 2 years ago, George Seawright was expelled from Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party after suggesting that Belfast Council should buy an incinerator to burn Roman Catholics and their priests. John Thorne reports.
George Seawright was shot twice in the head as he sat in a friend's car. A Republican splinter group claimed responsibility for the murder attempt. As police searched for clues, Mr. Seawright was taken to hospital for emergency surgery. George Seawright has been the most vocal and extreme loyalist politician of recent years. His political career collapsed when he was defeated in the general election. Although a Scotsman, Mr. Seawright stridently supported Ulster loyalism. His remark about incinerating Catholics was disowned by loyalist colleagues. An attempt by police to arrest him at an orange parade in Portadown last year led to violence, and later George Seawright was sent to jail for 9 months for his part in a demonstration outside Belfast City Hall against the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Although he held no political position, his uncompromising sympathy for loyalist paramilitary organisations meant he remained a prominent figure in Northern Ireland.
South Wales miners are taking legal advice to see if they can stop the election for President of the Miners' Union going ahead in January. They say that Arthur Scargill's resignation last week and his call for a new election is unconstitutional. Mr. Scargill's decision to campaign for re-election is being seen as an attempt to consolidate his position within the NUM. The South Wales miners have been particularly critical of his style of leadership.
At the inquiry into alleged sexual abuse of children in Cleveland, Dr. Marietta Higgs has again been challenged over her conduct in the affair. Counsel for the police, Robert Bartfield, accused her of never giving a moment's thought to the legal consequences when she diagnosed sexual abuse. He suggested that she didn't believe the police had any role in such cases.
Dr. Higgs was being cross-examined about her relations with the police, which deteriorated sharply last May after a stormy meeting with the police surgeon, Dr. Alistair Irvine. A Cleveland Social Services memo then effectively excluded police surgeons from the mounting volume of sex abuse cases. Counsel for the police, Robert Bartfield, suggested that with the burden of preparing evidence for resulting court cases then falling on her, she'd never given a moment's thought to what was needed. Dr. Higgs was said to have taken months sometimes to provide statements for police. You told them to catch you at the hospital, said Mr. Bartfield. The trouble was, when they did, you sprinted away from them. They should have made appointments, said Dr. Higgs. They did, said Mr. Bartfield. Then you weren't available. Asked whether she hadn't a duty to the child to make sure that court proceedings were properly conducted, Dr. Higgs said, "It was a very busy time. I dealt with the situation as best I could."
A Royal Navy minesweeper has found 2 mines in the Gulf, 90 miles east of Bahrain. One of them has been detonated. The mines were detected by HMS Brocklesby in the area where the American Navy captured an Iranian ship with several mines on board. Britain sent 4 minesweepers to the area 2 weeks ago. They've found 7 mines there so far.
The Princess Royal has been visiting the tiny country of Laos in Southeast Asia. It's the first time any member of the royal family has been to the country since it became a communist state in 1975. This report from our court correspondent, Michael Cole.
The communist young pioneers trooped out, eager to see their first real princess. Laos has been a Marxist state for only 12 years. It was a monarchy for 700. There's an abiding respect for royalty. The princess, in a dress with a hint of the Orient about it, was welcomed by the foreign minister and the president of the Women's Union. Then, immediately down to business with a visit to a showpiece kindergarten. It's open to all, but the 100 pupils are children of either party officials or civil servants. The children who live next door have no chance of a place. They looked on as the princess was welcomed with a traditional dance. Petals being scattered at the royal feet. Save the Children Fund provides money to train preschool teachers, and they work all over the country. The princess cut her visit short by half an hour, but the Laos didn't seem offended. They're simply delighted that she's here at all. Products from the West are back in Vientiane's central market after a decade of poverty and economic chaos. There are fewer shortages, though you need a basket full of banknotes to buy a basket full of groceries. The monks still run many of the schools. The princess visited one where Save the Children Fund is providing 6 extra classrooms so that senior pupils can have all-day schooling. The abbot, the monks and the novices awaited the princess. She was received with great formality, women approaching barefoot and on their knees. The princess seemed very moved. They tied cotton threads to her wrists. They're good luck charms, ensuring health and happiness. But you do have to wear them 3 days and 3 nights. This is Michael Cole for the 6 o'clock news in Vientiane.
Finally, let me just remind you of the 2 emergency numbers for information about the King's Cross fire. They are 01 if you're calling from outside London, 834 7777, or 01 230 7538.
And that was the 6 o'clock news on Thursday, the 19th of November, the day after a fire on the London Underground claimed the lives of 30 people and injured many others. Firemen who tried to rescue them faced an inferno. One of them said they were the worst scenes he'd witnessed in 26 years of service. Tonight, the courage of the fire brigade is being praised, and the search for clues to the cause goes on. From the 6 o'clock news, good night.
Hello to you. Well, it's been a very gloomy day as far as the weather's concerned as well, particularly over England and Wales. A lot of rain around. The wettest place I've seen up to now is Tetbury in Gloucestershire, just south of Stroud, where they had 26 millimetres of rain, or just about an inch, just slightly over an inch. Now, on the satellite picture, you can see the reason for that rain. Great swathe of cloud in the early hours of the morning, pushing its way across much of England, Wales, up into southern parts of Scotland. Through today, it's been working its way across into eastern parts of Europe, and at the same time moving southwards as well. Now, that's been associated with this cold front that's going to work its way southwards, and as its name implies, it'll be bringing colder, fresher weather into many places through tomorrow. And with the isobars very closely packed together up in the north, some very stormy winds there, especially around some of the hefty showers dotted around up there. Well, that's where the more persistent rain is at the moment. You can see it's more or less cleared the country now, and I think in the next few hours certainly that'll go away. And then for many places, many inland places anyway, it's going to be a dry night. A fair number of showers around these coastal fringes and some fairly heavy ones in the north. And as I've already mentioned, within those showers some quite strong and blustery winds too. And these showers through the night will be working their way down the North Sea and then eventually coming onto the Dutch coast, I think, as we go through the night. A fairly cold night, but I doubt if there's going to be very much in the way of ground frost. The winds are going to be too strong, I think, in many places for that. Tomorrow then, a dry, bright start for most of us with some sunshine. Showers you notice near this coast and up in the north, and particularly down the North Sea, some fairly heavy ones too. And through the day, as the winds come around more towards the north and northwest, I think you'll start to find some showers coming down this eastern coast of England, perhaps down as far as the Norfolk coast. But in many inland districts, staying dry and bright with some sunshine. In the far northwest, turning more cloudy later in the day, perhaps some rather more persistent rain later on. Now, it's going to be a very windy day, particularly in the north, with severe gales down that North Sea, and a much fresher day, especially over England and Wales. That's it. Bye-bye.
In 25 minutes, Maxi Priest, Donna Summer and the Proclaimers join the lineup of groups who are top of the pops. That's after news from the southeast of the country in London Plus.
After the Underground's worst fire, we look at the unanswered questions. Tributes for the fireman who gave his life for others. And the head of London's Underground answers his critics. Good evening. Nearly 24 hours after the worst fire on the London Underground, which left 30 people dead and 20 in hospital, many questions remain unanswered tonight. But what is clear is that the night when fire swept through a labyrinth of tunnels at King's Cross was a night of personal heroism and tragedy. There was the fireman who died in a desperate effort to rescue people trapped by dense smoke. He didn't even stop to put on a breathing mask. Other emergency workers risked their lives too. 2 of them are in hospital tonight. And when they learned of the tragedy, hospital workers themselves turned up to the University College Hospital to volunteer their services. As the scale of the disaster emerged, so did the questions. Could it have been avoided? What lessons can be learnt? And could it happen again? Unions representing rail, fire and ambulance workers point the finger at cuts in staffing levels. But a full inquiry will be held involving the Department of Transport, British Transport Police, the Fire Brigade and Forensic Services. For the latest news, we join our reporter Steve Clark at King's Cross.
23 hours later and the smell of acrid smoke is still hanging in the air here above the entrance to King's Cross Underground Station, as below teams of accident investigators set about the task of discovering just how the fire here started. They've now sealed this part of the underground station off to preserve vital debris and the clues that go with it. There's news tonight that the local borough here, Camden, have launched a disaster appeal fund. It's the King's Cross Disaster Appeal. And with me now is the Mayor of Camden, Jerry Williams. Mr. Williams, is this a tragedy that's really touched the whole borough?
It has. Not only has it touched the borough, I would think it's touched the whole nation.
So are you expecting really generous donations to flood in now?
I'm hoping that people would give generously to this horrible tragedy.
What sort of things do you see the money being used for?
Well, it would be used to help dependents and their families.
OK, Mr. Williams, thanks very much. With that, back to Richard Bath in the studio.
Thanks, Steve. Well, throughout the day, naturally, attention has remained focused on King's Cross. After visiting the injured in hospital, the Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher, went to see the devastation for herself, stopping to talk to the rescuers and the forensic scientists who will be carrying out the investigation into the causes of the fire. Antonia Higgs reports from King's Cross.
The appalling suddenness and ferocity of the fire is still hard to comprehend. Even those caught up in the inferno have difficulty finding words to convey the searing heat and choking smoke that could within minutes reduce King's Cross ticket office to such charred desolation. This morning, some of the survivors found it necessary to return to the station to try to piece together what had happened.
I went down into the tube initially and there were a few wisps of smoke and no one thought much of it at the time. Everyone decided to go turn back and go the other way and then the firemen arrived. But everyone went down into the circle line and suddenly within a minute there was thick black smoke filling the passageway across the Euston Road, the subway there. So everyone was virtually trapped down in the circle line but couldn't get out there at all.
The hunt to discover what exactly caused the blaze has been a grim one. In dreadful conditions, including the dangers of exposed asbestos, a stream of forensic experts have been working in the black hole that was once the underground passageway. But their findings are unlikely to answer the many critics of what happened after the fire had broken out.
Things like this shouldn't be allowed to happen. I would have thought that there ought to have been evacuation procedures, better practice, which could be put into effect much more quickly than appears to have been the case from what I observed. When we got off the escalator, which had the fire at the top of it, I think as passengers we almost ourselves figured out the best way out of there. I heard a train coming and made my own way back along with others to onto the platform and picked up that train.
Within my constituency, within the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a serious fire at Goodge Street Station, there's been a serious fire at Holborn Kingsway Station. Just outside my constituency at Oxford Circus, there was a serious fire there, and I think there is an increasing incidence of fires on the underground, and so an inquiry into just what's happened here won't be satisfactory.
What's not in question, though, is the heroism of the 150 firefighters who braved the flames. This morning, many of them were still there. When they'd first arrived, the only underground map was locked in the ticket office at the centre of the blaze.
It's horrendous. It would be unreasonable to expect all my fire officers to remember every single path and connecting tunnel without having this map available. So this is what we provide at the station for the first officer to pick up on arrival.
Each patient had his own horrific story to tell, but particularly significant, I think, is that from one of the firemen that we treated, who was in a state of emotional shock as well as inhaling a lot of smoke. And his story was literally of having to climb over bodies in order himself to eventually get out of the inferno that was raging down there. And he was at a state of near collapse on emerging from the station.
Well, the fireman who died last night was Station Officer Colin Townsley. He'd served 23 years in the fire brigade and leaves a widow and 2 daughters. Last night he was one of the first on the scene, leading in the Red Watch crew from Soho Fire Station just 6 minutes after the alarm was raised. Without thinking of his own safety and without stopping to put on breathing equipment, Colin Townsley moved into smoke-filled corridors to rescue distraught passengers. Judith Burns has been talking to his station commander.
At Soho Fire Station today, firemen mourned the death of a respected and popular colleague. Colin Townsley, a fireman for 23 years, had been a station officer at Soho since 1983. His commanding officer paid him this tribute.
Colin will be remembered as an honest, forthright, dedicated officer who was well respected by his men and a very efficient firefighter.
Have you been in touch with his family this morning?
The brigade are in touch with the family and doing everything they can for them to take the pressure off them. Obviously, when they were told, they were very upset.
The crews from Soho were among the first firefighters on the scene. They knew people were trapped, they knew it was vital to get to them quickly. To save time, Colin Townsley and others went into the black, smoke-filled tunnels without their breathing apparatus. They rescued dozens of people before Station Officer Townsley sent some of his men back for breathing apparatus. His loss has had a devastating effect on his colleagues.
Sad, very sad. Very tired as well. And I don't think the effects will really tell until tonight.
What kind of things were they saying?
It was basically disbelief. They still can't believe that he's not going to be there tonight. And he will be remembered for doing a job. And the blokes will carry on as they know that he would wish them to.
Colin Townsley leaves a wife and 2 young daughters. Fellow firefighters at Soho are deciding on a fitting memorial to a colleague whose bravery cost him his life.
The courage of fireman Colin Townsley. Well, last night's fire at King's Cross was the most serious incident on the underground since the accident at Moorgate 12 years ago when 43 people died. Anita Findlay has been looking at the background to the latest disaster.
In 1975, 43 people were killed at Moorgate Station when a train ploughed into the end of the Northern Line tunnel. Rescue workers spent 6 days pulling bodies from the wreckage. A further 74 passengers were injured. The first major underground fire was at Goodge Street in the summer of 1981. Nearly 100 passengers were forced to crawl through 3 trains to escape a blaze in a tunnel. 16 people were injured, 1 man died. A year later, 200 had to be evacuated from Wood Green Station on the Piccadilly line. There were no casualties. Then, in November 1984, disaster struck at Oxford Circus. A discarded cigarette caused a major blaze which trapped thousands of commuters underground. 14 rail workers were injured. The Victoria line was out of action for more than 3 weeks. A full review of London Underground safety was ordered. Since then, there have been 3 minor fires involving escalators. At Green Park in January 1985, Holborn at the end of that year, and at Victoria Station in 1986. But until last night, escalator fires had not claimed lives. King's Cross is London's busiest underground station, where 5 lines converge. 32,000 commuters regularly use it each weekday evening. Last night's fire broke out just after the peak period. It was first spotted on a wooden escalator coming up from the Piccadilly line concourse to the main ticket hall. From survivors, stories of utter chaos and confusion. Some sent up escalators, others down. Very few underground staff on hand, claims too of inadequate safety precautions.
Our members were in a terrible situation last night. You can imagine what it was like for them in trying to cope and trying to assist the public in the way that they so magnificently tried to do.
What are they told to do in a situation like that?
Well, we're not quite sure. This is why the Oxford Circus situation is important. You know, that there should be clear indications to the staff, clear indications to the public about what to do in a situation like that. We're not satisfied that that's the case.
Concern too from ASLEF, some drivers may have stopped at King's Cross uninformed of the seriousness of the fire above.
For some reason they did run through, but they seemed to have run through much later than I would have expected. But again, the inquiry, any inquiry, might well establish the facts better than we know them at this stage.
And at one stage, some of them were actually picking up and dropping off passengers. Should that be happening?
I wouldn't have thought so. But again, there might have been an underestimation about the extent of the fire and the consequences that that fire would have.
That report from Anita Finlay. Well, the scale of the fire and its tragic effects is bound to give rise to growing concern about passenger safety on the London Underground. And today the London Regional Passengers Committee said that King's Cross had been facing an enormous increase in usage. Well, joining me now from our central London studios, the committee's secretary, Rufus Barnes. Mr. Barnes, we have heard talk about staff cuts. Are there enough people to cope with emergencies like this at King's Cross?
One of the things that we believe that the inquiry should be looking into is the adequacy of staffing levels. I am not in a position now to say that they are inadequate, but the inquiry must take that on board.
Isn't there a danger that if staff are replaced by automatic barriers and automatic ticket collection points, that the people who could have helped won't be there?
That's a very real issue. We have told London Regional Transport and the government on a number of occasions that we want to see, and passengers want to see, a visible staff presence at stations. Those staff can give information to passengers under normal circumstances and be there to give assistance in the mercifully few emergencies that do take place.
Why isn't more money spent on safety at underground stations?
I am not in a position to say that there is not enough money spent on safety. I think that what has been said already this evening, the inquiry has got to cover everything. And one of the things that we will want to be saying is that the inquiry really shouldn't just be looking at King's Cross. It should be looking at safety on the underground. It should be looking at the adequacy of staffing levels and the adequacy of staff training.
But in the meantime, can people have confidence in the service?
We believe that the service is basically a safe service, and really I think that its record is excellent.
Mr. Barnes, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, of course, in any major disaster, the speed and efficiency of the emergency services are vital. By all accounts, last night was an outstanding example of dedication and devotion by all the firefighters, ambulance crews and hospital staff who spent most of the night trying to save lives. But union leaders are warning that if spending and staffing cuts go on, there may come a day when they won't be able to cope. Mark MacDonald now reports.
It was the biggest rescue operation seen in the capital for years, with more than 150 firefighters and 14 ambulance crews called to the scene. It was a major test of their ability to cope with disaster. The ambulance men abandoned an overtime ban over pay and conditions to see the job through. Their work described by Deputy Chief Officer Tom Crosby as a magnificent response and well beyond the call of duty. Ambulance stations involved were as far afield as Waterloo, Park Royal and Shoreditch. This, says the Drivers' Union, left large areas of the capital without cover.
And it meant that there was a domino effect through the other areas, and it meant that other areas were not covered properly. And of course it's quite appalling when you think that such a tragedy has occurred last night, and the ambulance service are quite willing to play Russian roulette with people's lives in London.
The ambulance service would say that under their umbrella system, whereby crews can go anywhere in the capital, they can easily cover by using an ambulance from an adjacent station.
Well, they would say that. Of course, they've been saying that consistently at our claims, and I think last night proved quite clearly that they're underfunded and they're understaffed. You just can't bring bodies to drive ambulances out of thin air. You can't run a service based on overtime. They seem to be admitting that, and I really think there should be a full inquiry into the funding of the ambulances, because if such a tragedy occurs again, I just believe that the death toll may be higher.
But it was the firefighters themselves who had to brave the tunnels of smoke and flames. As one officer put it, like diving into a blazing chimney. Tonight, some of them were rejecting the praise heaped on them in the wake of the rescue. Ken Cameron, General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, warns that while the service is being patted on the back, at the same time it's being slapped in the face with cuts in services.
Authority are talking about cutting 800 firefighters. I don't believe that you can reduce the fire service at a time after what we've seen last night. I believe that what we should be talking about is increasing the amount of firefighters in order that these premises can be inspected on a regular basis, and therefore we ensure that these incidents don't happen in the future.
Tonight, the Home Office rejected claims that the brigade is understaffed. Home Secretary Douglas Hurd was said to be satisfied with the standard of fire cover. And a spokesman for the London Ambulance Service strongly denied that last night's massive rescue operation put lives elsewhere in London at risk because ambulance stations were left without vehicles. He said crews can always be summoned from adjacent stations which are not involved.
Mark MacDonald reporting. Well, of course, the questions will go on, and most of them today have been directed at London Regional Transport. The man whose job it is to come up with the answers is Dr. Tony Ridley, the chairman of London Underground. A short time ago, I spoke to him at LRT headquarters. Dr. Ridley, one fire might be able to be blamed on bad luck, but after so many fires in recent years in the Tube, culminating in the tragedy yesterday, is the evidence not there's something gravely wrong with London Transport's safety mechanisms and systems?
Well, we are going to carry out a full inquiry, and we will be looking at all aspects of what happened in the tragedy last evening. We will be making comparisons between that fire at King's Cross and previous fires. My initial assessment is that the fires were of a totally different nature.
But you carried out an inquiry after the Oxford Circus fire. What's happened to the recommendations which came out of that, which were for basic things such as sprinklers, looking into the possibility of sprinklers, looking into the possibility of smoke detectors, looking into better illumination for emergency exits? There's no evidence of any of that.
Well, I can tell you that we are introducing sprinklers associated with our escalators. Our staff yesterday had very powerful handheld torches available to them, which were recommendations following Oxford Circus. Our colleagues from the fire services have been good enough to acknowledge publicly today that cooperatively between themselves and ourselves, a lot of measures have been taken following the recommendations after the Oxford Circus fire.
Such as what?
Such as the provision of maps, such as the banning of smoking.
The map was in the ticket office, which went up in flames.
We did provide, as they sought, as Mr. Kennedy has acknowledged, we did provide the maps to them.
I myself had the misfortune a couple of years ago to be caught in the Holborn Kingsway fire, a very terrifying experience it was. One of the escape routes, the only escape route which was open to me at that time, was to get on a train as the platform was filling with smoke. Now the trains kept on going through, they refused to stop. Why is that? And this, I'm told, happened again last night.
A large number of people did travel to other stations to safety away from the bottom of the escalators last evening. At a particular point, I should emphasize, our colleagues in the fire services and the police take over. The stations no longer are ours. They asked us to non-stop the trains at that stage, and we agreed with them. But there were a substantial number of people did escape to other stations by means of trains.
But isn't the main exit route from the station, one of the main exit routes from a smoke-filled station, being blocked off because you don't have the trained staff on the platforms to help people and make decisions about getting people onto trains and stopping people getting off trains?
I do not believe, from my preliminary examination, and we do have to have a full inquiry, I do not believe from my preliminary examination that shortage of staff in any way yesterday evening contributed either to the cause of the fire or its terrible aftermath.
This is one of the points which the unions have been making today, that the cutbacks in staff are making it more difficult to run stations properly and safely. What do you say to that? There have been 1,600 jobs lost in the last 3 years. There are supposedly another 1,200 to go. How can you operate a system safely with so few staff?
Well, once again, I give the public a full commitment to examine all aspects of the fire, including the staffing question. I can simply say that the staffing reductions that we have introduced over the last 2 years have been primarily those of introduction of one-person operation. A number of jobs have been transferred to our cleaning services organisation. I frankly don't believe that staffing levels in any way contributed to the tragedy yesterday evening. But again, we will examine it.
Dr. Tony Ridley, the chairman of the London Underground there. Well, before we go tonight, we're going back to Steve Clark at King's Cross for the latest news and a travel update. Steve.
Thanks, Lucy. Work is going on now behind me to seal off the station as much as possible to allow the accident investigation teams to carry out their vital work of sifting through the debris down below to find out how the fire started. The orange boxes you can see over my shoulder are portable showers to allow the workers to remove asbestos from their clothing that's still hanging in the air down below, and that work will be going on through the night. Now on the travel front, there's better news. The Metropolitan and Circle lines are running and are stopping at King's Cross, and an hour ago all the other tube lines through here opened up, although apart from the Metropolitan and Circle lines, no other tube trains will be stopping at King's Cross. With that, back to the studio.
And we'll take a quick look at tomorrow's weather. It'll be a much brighter day.
In a cloud of smoke and flame. And the PC that I was talking to felt that in some way he was to blame for that and he was inadequate.
The police officers who were first at the scene of the fire and helped guide hundreds to safety have been speaking about those feelings of guilt.
We thought we'd had done quite a good job, but when we heard the first reports of the casualties, we just couldn't believe it.
It was only when we got outside, they said at that stage, I think it was 11 they'd found, and then we got told that Steve Hansen had been taken in hospital as well, and we didn't know how bad he was. And so people were quite surprised to see us emerge, because as far as they were concerned, we were dead as well.
2 young ambulance officers talked today about the night they'll always remember. Wednesday was only their 3rd day in the service.
And the heat was so intense, even in the street. And as we pulled up, there was just this young woman staggering, crying with pain.
She was so hot. And then my mate, he cut her clothes off. And as we were cutting her clothes off, the blisters were just coming up.
Psychiatric experts say specialist help will be needed for many who witnessed Wednesday night's horrors. Paul Davis, News at 10, Central London.
Dawn today at King's Cross, and railway workers leave a floral tribute to the firefighter who died. Police laid out other flowers and wreaths given by members of the public as fire investigators went underground to continue their work, sifting through the rubble. Inside, the first close-up pictures of the top of number 4 escalator reveal how the fireball swept through everything in its path. Burning ceiling tiles fell on top of passengers trying to escape back down the stairs.
In this corridor leading to the outside, black toxic fumes were so thick people simply collapsed, some just yards from safety. But remarkably, others survived by huddling in a lavatory off the corridor. At the height of the inferno, the heat was so intense that sheets of wooden panelling turned to charcoal in seconds. Asbestos sheeting initially made forensic investigations precarious. Only a handful of officers are allowed down to the bottom of the escalator, where the air is particularly stagnant. A closer look at the undamaged portion of the ceiling halfway down reveals the seat of the fire. Officers are now dismantling escalator machinery, including underneath, to search for clues in cramped conditions.
Especially on and around the escalator, it's not too bad. It's extremely confined. It's very difficult conditions for them, but they are excellent officers.
The forensic experts here say it'll be several days before they've completed their investigations. However, they stress that at the moment they're not pursuing any one theory, and they're keeping an open mind about what might have caused the fire. The ticket office is now just a scorched and tangled mess opposite a discarded fire extinguisher no one had time to use. This evening, more flowers, including a spray from the colleagues of firefighter Townsley, and on one wreath the message, "It could have been any of us." John Draper, News at 10, King's Cross.
Scotland Yard are still trying to identify the 6 most badly burned fire victims. Police say they may only be identified from dental records and personal belongings. They named 18 of the dead, among them 3 members of the same family. Tonight, the local council, the Borough of Camden, announced it was setting up an appeal fund for the victims and their dependents.
At St Pancras Coroner's Court, the awful ordeal for relatives of identifying loved ones lost in the disaster will probably take several more days. There's been a steady stream of desperate relatives, many leaving with their worst fears confirmed. The true depth of the tragedy is now emerging. The Singh family from East London lost a brother, his sister and her son. Roy Singh had taken his sister Shashila Kottal and her 7-year-old son Dean to see her other son Marvin in hospital. They all perished. Marvin will now be brought up by his aunt.
Roy was a very loving and caring brother. My sister was a wonderful mother to her sons. And Dean was just a fun-loving little boy with a wonderful sense of humour.
The blaze took the life of 25-year-old Italian Marco Liberati, visiting his fiancée on her birthday. She suffered dreadful facial injuries. His brothers now made the journey to Britain to take Marco back home.
We heard today from the coroner that the body of the young Marco will be released on Tuesday. That's exactly what Luciano Liberati, the brother, asked me, because he would like to take the body of the brother in Italy, back in Italy, to the parents.
Journalist Felicity Dearden died from smoke inhalation as she set off on her journey home to West Germany. The Reuters correspondent had been in Britain for her grandmother's funeral.
Felix was a terribly popular correspondent, had a number of friends in Europe and Asia, and she was a very, very good journalist, and she will be sorely missed here at Reuters.
Officially named today, too, was 40-year-old fireman Colin Townsley. He died trying to save others. Judy Laybourne, ITN, Central London.
The investigators say there are plenty of theories about how the fire started, but they still don't know the real cause. The Transport Police think it's unlikely that arson or a bomb could be responsible. One suggestion is that oil and rubbish, like dust, could have gathered under the escalator and ignited. Passengers say the escalator wasn't working properly. Burning rubber was smelt. Friction could have given off considerable heat. Highly flammable white spirit is said to have been used to clean the escalators. And a build-up of explosive methane gas leaking from a fractured sewer pipe is another possibility.
The escalator at Marylebone Tube Station is of the same wooden design and was built at roughly the same time as that at King's Cross. Our cameras went down underneath it, into the machine room where the motors and electrical cables that power these stairways are housed. The equipment was installed in 1939, just 4 years before that at King's Cross. Here it still works perfectly. At King's Cross, a machine similar in most respects burst catastrophically into flames. I'm standing now in a passage underneath the Marylebone escalator. The one at King's Cross was almost identical to this. Fire investigators noticed that this area and the teak steps now passing over my head were practically undamaged by the fire. Where the fire took hold was one stage beyond, inside, where the cogs and wheels and chains drive this escalator upwards. This has ruled out the theory burning rubbish could have been to blame. We were shown the system whereby rubbish is collected in pans underneath and cleared out daily. And they say drip pans to collect oil are also emptied regularly before they can become a fire risk. But was there a possibility of a build-up of methane gas below the escalator?
I'm not aware, I've not heard of any other incidents where methane gas has been involved in escalators.
Now what about the use of white spirit in cleaning the escalators? What if someone was using it and it got spilt? Is that a possibility?
Anything's a possibility. I can't comment on possibility that may occur. Were anything spilt in these sort of areas, we would expect it to be cleaned immediately.
There's been speculation too an electrical fault could have been to blame. But all the high voltage wiring is cased in metal, and it's believed a serious electrical problem would have stopped the escalator at an early stage. Whatever started the fire, engineers say privately they're baffled as to how enough combustible gas built up to start such a major conflagration. There aren't many